Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a review of The Relentless Moon by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is the third book in the Lady Astronaut series. I've been meaning to film this review, for a while now. I finished this book at the end of August and I really enjoyed it, but just haven't managed to get my act together to do the review until now. Even though this is the third book in the series, I think it does work pretty well as a standalone. So if you haven't read the first two and this one sounds interesting, you could just start here. I do recommend the first two though. The first one is called The Calculating Stars and the second one is The Faded Sky. The Relentless Moon actually takes place during the same time period as book two, The Faded Sky. It's just that the main character of the first two books is on a spaceship to Mars during the events of book three. So she is out of the action and we have a new main character. The premise of the Lady Astronaut series is that in 1952 a meteor strikes the Chesapeake Bay, which completely wipes out the entire east coast of the United States, as well as causing global climate change that's going to make Earth uninhabitable in about 50 years. So this means that when it should have been like the early space program, instead everything gets accelerated. So by the 1960s, we already have a lunar colony and they are working on starting a colony on Mars. So it's kind of a alternate history science fiction story where it's very heavily based in actual history and the technology and things that were available in the 1950s and 60s, but it's being used in a different way. So it does almost read like reading historical fiction. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, I feel like that actually goes along really well with the theme and the feel of this series, and if you haven't seen Hidden Figures, I do highly recommend it. It's a great movie. So the main character and the narrator of the first two books, Elma York, is, as I mentioned, on a spaceship to Mars during the events of The Relentless Moon. The narrator of The Relentless Moon is Nicole Worgan, who was a secondary character in the first two books. She's also one of the first group of female astronauts. She's a very interesting character and the kind of character that we don't get often enough in any kind of fiction. She is both an astronaut and a political wife, and she has a lot of other unexpected skills that you learn about in this book. She is 50 years old and deals with things like aging and arthritis. Nicole is a character who is very good at what she does. She knows who she is, and she's very determined and kind of hardened by life, but also a very believable and relatable character, and I really enjoyed getting her perspective in this book. I think that if you didn't relate to Elma in the first couple of books, you might find something you really like in Nicole's perspective. So at the beginning of the book, Nicole is basically juggling her duties as a political wife with her career as an astronaut. She would really rather be an astronaut. She's very good at it and she's trained and it's a skill that's needed. But on the other hand, her husband, who's a senator, is contemplating a presidential bid, and she's also very good at what she does as a politician's wife. She knows how to socialize and remember people's names and be useful in that way as well. So she's trying to kind of juggle these two aspects to her career. I really like the fact that even though she doesn't really enjoy being the politician's wife, she knows that she's good at it and she knows that the things that she's doing are important. So she's basically a character who is very willing to do her duty at great personal cost. At the start of the story, Earth is facing some serious political issues as things are underway with the space program. There's a movement called Earth First, which has risen up and it is causing a lot of political unrest. There are sort of two threads to this movement. First of all are all the people who have a sort of justifiable issue with the idea of getting humanity off of Earth, which is that anyone with any kind of underlying health condition is not going to be able to go into space, either to the moon or to Mars, because, well, it would kill them. If they have, asthma or a heart condition or anything like that, they're not going to be able to physically survive space flight, at least not with the technology that we have in this story. So those people are all going to get left behind on Earth. Then there's also this other more dangerous thread to the Earth First movement, which is that there are people that basically think the whole thing is a hoax, the climate isn't changing, humanity is not doomed, and this is all just some sort of plot, and those people want to destroy the space program. At the beginning of the story, it becomes clear that there is some sabotage going on in the space program. This is obviously very dangerous. It can cause, space shuttles to crash and all sorts of other things to go wrong. Space is very dangerous, and public opinion is also very easily influenced by things going wrong. So when things do go wrong, the characters have to figure out how to manage it and spin it and deal with that, because that's part of the reality of having the space program. Nicole ends up having to investigate the source of this sabotage. Later on in the story, we do end up in what I guess I would consider to be a closed circle mystery where there are a limited number of suspects and she's trying to figure out who the perpetrator is. Although this is science fiction, there's definitely a strong political and spy thriller element to it. Although this book would have been written before 2020 and then turned into the publisher, there is a polio outbreak in the story that plays a very important role, and there's a lot of discussion of polio and pandemics in here, so it feels really, really timely, even though that was clearly completely unintentional by the author, and there is an author's note at the end where she kind of addresses how that suddenly became a lot more relevant and some of the research that went into it. It was definitely interesting hearing about the polio epidemic, and it's something I've heard about lately in other sources as well, looking back to history, how people dealt with epidemics and pandemics before. So that's a pretty big part of the plot in here, and while it was a little bit painful to read about, it was also very, very interesting. The idea of an outbreak of disease on a small lunar colony is frankly pretty terrifying, and I think it was portrayed really, really well. I really enjoy the sense of science and alternate history in this trilogy. I am very much not a scientist, so I could not even begin to tell you if the things that Kowal is doing with science in this trilogy even make sense at all. I have a friend who's an aerospace engineer, but he hasn't read this trilogy yet, so to my perspective, it all feels really plausible and believable as a reader. It's possible that for an actual scientist, it would be kind of ridiculous, but I really like the historical realistic feel of the series. The author really addresses a lot of issues like the sexism and racism of the 1950s and 1960s. It feels very authentic as well. I think she said herself she didn't mean to really make the book about that or address those things specifically. She just didn't eliminate them and tried to present them as they really were. So it's a little bit hard to read about sometimes, especially as you see the ways in which our society hasn't changed as much as we might wish it has. But I think she does a really good job handling a lot of sensitive issues in the book, and the books do feel very representative and inclusive in a way that also feels fairly authentic and not like it was all plotted out on a spreadsheet. The characters have realistic issues that don't define them but are just part of their characters. For example, Nicole, the main character, has anorexia, and it's something that is addressed and is an issue in the plot, but it's not all of who she is as a character, and it's not her main plot arc either. I found that to actually be rather realistic. I think we all know, both in our own lives and the lives of all the people we know, most people have something going on, and some people deal with different things, and it is something that happens in real life, whether it's an eating disorder or something else, and people do continue on with their lives dealing with things. Sometimes things don't magically go away, but it's not necessarily something that consumes their life either. Overall, I thought Nicole was a really great character to read about, very different than Elma in the first few books, but I really respected who she was as a person, and I liked that there was a strong, confident, older female character that was very believable to me. She is living in a world that doesn't really understand the different aspects of her personality and is able to understand her better when she's all dressed up and being a political wife compared to her desire to be an astronaut. She also really just has a desire to serve and to do her duty. She would like to do that as an astronaut and as a pilot, but she's willing to do whatever it is that she needs to do, and she, maybe while experiencing some bitterness, is able to put aside her feelings and do whatever it is that needs doing at the time. So it was really interesting to learn more about her as a character in this book. The portrayal of her relationship with her husband was also very interesting because they have a very strong marriage that has lasted a long time, and it also has some issues. I think the relationship between Elma and her husband Nathaniel from the first two books, from what I remember, is a much more sweet, touching, beautiful relationship, and the relationship between Nicole and Kenneth is very different. They care about each other a lot and have a strong bond. They're also very much partners in what they do, but their marriage has been largely long distance, and that has caused some issues. They also have desires that don't really line up with each other because Nicole wants to continue with her career as an astronaut, and Kenneth wants to be the president of the United States. And obviously, she thinks that he would do a good job with that and supports his political ambitions, but it also is pulling her away from the career that she wants to have. So I thought the portrayal of that was pretty interesting, where there isn't necessarily an easy answer, but it doesn't destroy their relationship either. I don't want to give any spoilers with how things work out with that, but it was an interesting portrayal of a settled relationship. Again, something I feel like we don't get that much in fiction is this marriage where it's not all perfect, it's not all sunshine and roses, but you can tell that they have a strong partnership and are used to working together and do still love and desire each other. I have never loved Mary Robinette Kowal's writing, and I couldn't really get into her first series, which was kind of a Jane Austen with magic type series, but I have really enjoyed the Lady Astronaut series so far, and I think The Relentless Moon was the best one yet. I think it's a really outstanding book in a lot of ways, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where she takes the series next. I know there is at least one more novel in this sequence planned that might be back following Elma again on Mars. I do think that most of the novels in the series seem to work individually on their own. My husband read The Calculating Stars, which is the first book, and didn't even realize that there were supposed to be more books in the series after that. I also do think, like I said, this book could be a standalone, but I think when you take the series as a whole, it's this very interesting portrait of a world that is similar to ours with some historical differences, and it just does feel very, very believable. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where the series goes next. So let me know down in the comments if you read this book and what you thought of it. I'd be really curious to hear your opinions. I have heard a few other people say that they also liked this book the best in the series so far, and that they preferred Nicole as a narrator to Elma. So let me know your thoughts.